Patrick, here we are. We are talking after that long playoff run. We don't have players to speak to anymore, so people are stuck with me asking questions. Instead of you asking me, have you thought about this being your last
Oh boy,
as an editor at the Southern Province?
let's get too real, Paul.
Yeah, exactly. I love needling you about that. I'm gonna beat that dead horse for a long time. But speaking
You
of
never.
horses, here we are with the Canucks headed into the draft without picks in the first two rounds. And we'll get to their stuff later in terms of what they might do. But certainly, I know you've been writing this great series of all the prospects they already have in the system.
Yeah.
But what's popped up lately is, beating a dead horse, as I said, rumors about another large contract player the Canucks may be interested in.
Yeah, I mean, Oliver Ekman-Larsson is a player I think that most teams should be interested in. I mean, it was kind of surprising realizing that he's already 29. Because I remember it didn't seem that long ago that you'd talk to people in hockey and they'd say, if I could pick a player to start my team around, this is the guy. I don't think that's the case anymore. That said, I think he's a guy that still generally flies under the radar because he's always been in Arizona. Still has a ton of talent. The contract is big and it goes for a long time. That is, I would say, the biggest sort of worry in us. But on the surface, I get it. You add him, he probably makes your team better. Arizona is obviously a team that has a lot of financial question marks around it. Their owner has money, but also is in an industry that's cash flow based for the most part. He's a hotels and casino guy, and if you could flip him for say someone like Louis Eriksson, who obviously doesn't have a lot of money left on his contract, it's only about $5 million for the last two seasons here after he had his bonus paid in July. That's a cash advantage. If that's the way you're thinking, if you're not thinking in on ice terms, you're thinking purely about your bank account. That's the kind of exchange that certainly on the surface makes sense. Obviously, the Canucks would have to give up more. They don't have a ton. I mean, the prospect series has been interesting. It's revealed, some interesting players. Certainly, as we've reached the top, I think we know that there are definitely some very interesting prospects to sort of fill out the middle of the Canucks lineup. I think Vasily Podkolzin will be a first liner, but the rest of them is kind of, second, third line wingers, second pairing defensemen at best, which is good. You need those guys. But that this isn't especially deep prospect pool. It's an interesting prospect pool, but it's not a super deep prospect pool. And so, you'd be giving up one of those guys for sure, I think, and maybe more. So, it is an expensive price. That's not necessarily something Jim Benning's ever been afraid of. We've seen that twice now in the last year, making trades where he's been willing to move guys on because he wants to make the team better now. And that's certainly still a very clear argument for that, given the fact that Quinn Hughes and Elias Pettersson are already kind of banking into their peak and are for one more year anyway on relatively cheap contracts. So that standpoint makes sense. The long big picture is a bit more challenging, but like I said, if you're looking to make your team better right now, you can see why they're interested.
But considering the 50-year legacy of this team, which we've just celebrated, is making your team better right now instead of going for a championship with an eye maybe 2-3 years down the road. I think the Canucks surprised everyone this year, but the analysis I saw around earlier trade rumors, whether it was Matt Dumba, Brock Besser,
Right.
a lot of angst over the prospect of giving up a guy like Besser. The argument against it is, had they had the cap flexibility to sign him to a longer term deal, it wouldn't even be on the table because, you're now looking at, there's no doubt. I mean, Besser was maybe in that upper echelon category after his rookie year.
Right.
But, Pettersson, Hughes, two untradeable, unmovable guys, they are going to command a lot of money. Can you afford to have another long-term contract around your neck that is, okay, if you don't get that cut, you'll be better next year, but what will you be 4 years from now?
Well, that's exactly it. And, in the end, it is a move that very much is about thinking about only now. In the end, that is the job of the general manager, is to win now. And, That's why one of these, one of the
I
things
will
about all
challenge
these
you on
contracts.
that, Patrick. I'll just jump in
Yeah,
here. I would say perhaps under normal circumstances, you always hear this. Why is a general manager going to go prospect crazy, which fans always
right.
want, because you're then developing the next GM's players. It's a very
Yeah,
clever way to look at it.
yeah.
I can't see a way that we're looking at fans in Rogers Arena. So you make your team better next year. We know these owners are completely motivated by money. Why, if you can't sell tickets and you're not getting playoff revenue, I, perhaps this is your out to say, you know what? Yeah, we always want to be better,
Hmm.
but we have the luxury now of not having that pressure and looking 2, 3 years down the road.
Chance to sell more jerseys that you haven't sold before. That would be about, I mean, you're right. The revenue aspect is a big challenge, and that it is hard to, you can't do any of these assessments without looking at that fact. And certainly, we're seeing that, like the Canucks, like basically every other team, I would say in the NHL, have been cutting back in sort of every area they can. I would say spending on players is not an area you necessarily want to cut back on, and maybe this is the moment to take advantage of that in terms of the on ice stuff, because other teams just like the Coyotes just can't necessarily afford it. That said, you're right. I mean, what is a hockey team for but to sell tickets? And if you're not selling tickets, it kind of leaves out a big part of the equation. I think at the end of the day, you can't, this is a sign that teams aren't operating in those terms, though, that they are hopeful that at some point in this coming season they will have bums in seats somewhere, whether it's in some
Oh,
weird hybrid
Tampa,
bubble.
guessing, Patrick.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think there are going to be cases where this could be a thing, and it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. I think basically what we're seeing is that teams are realistic about the schedule, but they're still trying to approach things in sort of the best case scenario from their own perspective. And the fact of the matter remains, the Canucks are a reasonably, as far as this league goes, a cash rich team. And that they certainly have said they're willing to spend on players. The question, of course, is what they're willing to spend on other parts of their business. But in terms of putting a team on the ice that talent-wise, is going to compete, is going to push forward, they've basically said that's their plan. They've said they made the second round this year. They believe they're close to making a real run. I think that may be more hopeful than realistic. But again, if you're trying to make your team better one year over next, adding a guy like Oliver Ekman-Larsson, at least for one season, in this one season ahead, is clear. He's a guy that makes your team better, and that's the point of it all. The long run thing, as we said, I mean, that's a long standard thing that GMs don't think about the end of the contract because they're never around to see the end of the contract.
Traditionally, we know that the trade deadline can be a bit of a disappointment, and that you see much more action around the draft. The Canucks, well, we know that one of the reasons the Canucks don't have a pick in the first 2 rounds is they made that great deal last year for Miller, of course, which really paid off in spades. But still, the philosophy of trading away first rounders is something that can get an organization into a hole in a hurry. Are you expecting anything from the Canucks seriously in the next week and a bit?
Well, I mean, we've seen Jim Benning, has been a draft day guy. He's always been interested in doing that. He hasn't necessarily always pulled something off. I did talk to him today, and he's I think trying to be realistic. You never know, but I think he was trying to say, no, I'm not expecting things to happen. He's trying to set the bar low for himself. And being realistic with fans. He also admits that he's talking to people all the time. I mean, every GM I think right now is talking to people all the time, and not just because it's a pandemic, because it's just that time of year. I don't know. I'm still trying to get my head around the fact that, first of all, that they could make this OEL move. Ekman-Larsson makes their team better, but then you're saying, well, who the heck's going to play with him, because you're already tied up so much money elsewhere. You're still going to have to make other moves. There's a lot of complications to make that move, sort of knock-on complications, I should say, to make that first move happen. So we'll see. I am inclined towards no, just because generally that's been the trend, is that no, these big things don't happen. That in the end, this is a team that has, Jim Benning has done a lot of work in free agency. That said, we have seen 2 bold trades in the last year. And it's not, that may be the new trend, that there is a move towards bold trades. But I am going with the bigger picture, which is that No, I mean he's made a few, like I said, in the past at the deadline, but or sorry, on draft day. But I'm not holding my breath.
If you're looking at the other pieces of the Canucks, for Tannen, Markstrom, Tanev, Stetcher, Toffoli, which one, in your opinion, gets done first? Either signed or basically like no.
Well, I think Markstrom. I've said this. I've said this before. I think, but I think Markstrom in the end is the key domino. I think if I mean more than anything, if he happens, most of Toffoli maybe next. Tanev. I think Tanev is the least likely of the big three, just because I think the Canucks do know in terms of sort of his long-term future is it's diminished. He's not the player he once was. That's wear and tear, and partly that's just straight age. Toffoli they really want to keep, but reality means that they need to get Markstrom sorted out first. Of course, if they don't sort out Markstrom, then I think Toffoli almost becomes a slam dunk. That said, next Friday anything could happen when free agency opens. I think Stetcher they're going to wait and see. It's pretty clear that I think they're looking at that Ben Hutton story in their favor, in that maybe they didn't need to sign Journey Ben when they did. They could have waited and just signed Hutton. I think maybe Hutton's price surprised everybody, that he ended up going for as little as he did. I think Stetcher is probably aware of that as well. He would have seen how things went with Hutton last year, and in a way, he has to make a choice whether whatever the Canucks are offering him now is more than what he might get if he waits to see what the market holds. I think he's more likely than not to stay, but again, that's those sort of him having to figure out the market, and maybe there is a team out there that likes his work and is going to offer more money. Tannen is a real X factor because it's really hard to see. The Canucks right now, as it stands, can't basically afford to keep him unless they make some other moves. And even if you make an Ekman-Larsson for Eriksson trade, that actually chips away $2 million out of your cap space. Of course, it gives you a defenseman you didn't have before. You're looking for less, but it makes it even harder to give Tannen a raise. And most people seem to think that an arbitration win for him would look like $3 million, which is more than double what he's making now, or he made last season, I should say. So I think the Tannen reality is just unlikely. Although, as I noted, I pointed out elsewhere, Kevin Epp is Jake Virtanen's agent, and he's also Oliver Ekman-Larsson's late agent. So we'll see how that plays out. Certainly a lot of balls in the air, entirely possible they all fall to the ground, entirely possible a surprising combination get caught.
Excellent. Great stuff, Patrick. We'll look forward to reading your stuff through the draft and the crazy start of free agency. It's never boring in Canuck land. So thanks. We'll keep reading your stuff.
See you soon.